Y a continuación presento a nuestra siguiente ponente, que es Paula Silva, que es la Coordinadora de Enseñanzas, Científicas y de Administración Escolar del S. Almeida Garret. Paula es doctora en Historia y Filosofía de la Ciencia y ha sido agente de alfabetización y profesora de educación secundaria. Ahora mismito es docente en la Escuela Superior de Educación Almeida Garret, como he comentado, y también es la directora científica de la Maestría en Administración Escolar, en Supervisión Pedagógica y en Formación de Formadores. También Paula coordina el Núcleo de Administración, Desarrollo y Evaluación de las Organizaciones Educativas en su país, en Portugal. Paula, como investigadora científica, ha participado en varias líneas de investigación, entre ellas Educación, Sociedad y Memoria, y ha organizado múltiples seminarios centrados principalmente en el liderazgo escolar, con el apoyo de la Red de Políticas Europeas sobre el Liderazgo Escolar, que, como hemos comentado desde ayer, es un poco el motor que nos ha movido a montar este Congreso de Autonomía y de Liderazgo, que es la red EPNoSL. Sí, nosotros lo pronunciamos, para andar por casa decimos SNOL, pero realmente es al revés. Paula es la representante de su país y con el apoyo de esta red ha montado múltiples seminarios y múltiples actuaciones. Y a continuación nos va a dar una visión de lo que es el sistema educativo en su país, en Portugal, pero sobre todo centrado en lo que es la exposición de la red EPN. ¿De acuerdo? Muchísimas gracias.
Buenos días. First of all, I have to apologize for not speaking in Spanish because I understand very well Spanish, but I cannot speak properly in Spanish, so I have to speak in English, if you don't mind. And first, before my presentation, I want to thank the organization of this Congress for having invited me, and I hope not to disappoint you with my presentation. Okay. my presentation will have two parts. In the first one, I will present to you European Policy Network on School Leadership project, because it was one of the requests that the organization put me. And the second part, I'll give some ideas, I'll present some ideas about autonomy and school leadership. First, I'll present you the rationale of this topic within the project, and afterwards I will sketch some main issues about autonomy in Portugal. What is the European Policy Network on School Leadership? You may ask yourselves. So, EPNoSL is a partnership of 13 ministries of education, 11 research institutions, 11 academic institutions, 7 associations, and 9 expert educational researchers located in 21 European Union member states. For detailed information, you have the portal, and you are very welcome to visit our portal and to explore all the resources we have there. What is the European Policy Network on School Leadership? Okay, this is some protagonists. One of the person that is in the picture is Tom Hamilton. He gave you a presentation this morning. We have Katie Papadakis is the project leader manager, and you have some other representatives, because we have very different associations, actors and organizations, and we have here some faces that represent all those agencies and organizations. What is the aim of EPNoSL? The aim of EPNoSL is to facilitate and stimulate high-level cooperation between educational researchers, national, regional, and local education policymakers, practitioners, representatives, trade unions, and employers' organizations for influencing development and implementation of policies in the European Union countries with the aim of improving school leadership. The goal is to get better understanding of the interplay between political culture and educational policy, and how various ways countries are responding to the global exchange of policy ideas that includes the standards movement and the new public management or accountability in the education sector. What does the project do? To achieve its aim, the project seeks to highlight scholarly and research underpinning of school leadership and generate new multinational research evidence as required for the purpose of formulating policy recommendations based on evidence-based good practice in school leadership. This is, I think, why you are also here today. Design and develop and implement tools to support school leaders across Europe become more effective in their professional practice to enhance student learning. Enhance the networking capacity of groups within and between national contexts and factors relating to further professionalization of school leaders, and to improve the impact school leadership has on educational performance, individual, institutional, and systemic, informed by the principle of equity and learning in education. How does the project work? Its method of working is peer learning. That is, it works as a collaborative network in which members co-create manage and share research and practice-based knowledge to inform policy in the area of school leadership. The network utilizes a variety of different approaches, including peer learning events, national workshops, online forum and webinars, newsletters. You can find all these resources on the portal of the project. This is why I'm showing you the links. What has the project achieved to date? In the first year, the project has initiated the establishment of national policy networks on school leadership, undertaken a review of the state of school leadership in national countries, and this is the link for the national reports. They are all available online. Established an e-portal that deposit of resources and dissemination of information in school leadership, held successful webinars and peer learning activities. What has the project planned for the near future? In the second phase, the project will continue to host national policy networks wherein stakeholders discuss national issues, host national workshops and on school leadership, hold webinars and on school leadership, host peer learning events on school leadership, produce national reports on key themes associated with school leadership, equity and learning. And this is the case why I'm going later on to present the case of autonomy, because in the Portuguese context and other contexts like Latvia, Hungary and Estonia, researchers in this context studied and made some new research on school autonomy. To develop national and European networks on school leadership. This is what actually is work in progress. Why should I get involved with the project? You may ask yourselves. So, what you can gain from it, access to resources on the issue of school leadership, up-to-date information on what is happening in the field of school leadership in Europe, the opportunity to share your ideas and practices and engage with a community committed to improve school leadership, equity and learning, to practice in the online fora organized to participate on the online fora organized by the project through its portal, the possibility to interact with school heads and principals, leaders of trade unions and employers associations, as well as academic experts in the field of school leadership. And how do you join the national network? To join the project national network in your country, please contact your partner, and the Spanish partner is the Ministry of Education, as you might know. Anybody that don't have a national network can join, because in the portal we have the facility to become an affiliated member, and this is the link to be considered a member. Autonomy on school leadership. School autonomy is one of the themes selected, as I said, to be investigated during the ongoing period of the project. The concept of autonomy includes several aspects that are more or less interrelated. And I'm going now to present you the rationale within the project upon which we have carrying on new research on school autonomy. In LifeSmooth's article, Diverse Perspectives and Hope on Autonomy in School Leadership, autonomy is defined on 3 levels. We can define autonomy on 3 different levels. On the state level, and on the state level it means self-government or the right to self-government. Every state has its own legislation on education. On the community or organizational level, it means self-governance. On the individual level, it means independence or freedom of will or own action. In addition, Professor Moose explains that autonomy is only interesting as a term if it indicates that an organization, a school, or professional actors, teachers, and school leaders are given some room for maneuver, and that constraints from the outside and inside are reduced to the necessary and legitimate frames, values, and norms. Maria, moments ago, told us most about pedagogical autonomy inside the schools. But we can face, study, question ourselves about autonomy regarding other levels of the system, of the education system. Hasso Kukelman, our Estonian colleague, relates autonomy to decision-making process and school leaders can take at the school level. So we focus preferably on the school level. And regarding the school level, he refers that we can have limited but also large autonomy. Limited autonomy is when the state defines previously school curricula and learning environment, school financing, physical environment of school, rules about collaboration with families and other stakeholders. In this case, the school leader has limited power and limited responsibility, so this role is limited mainly to administrative tasks. On the other hand, large autonomy gives power to schools and school leaders so that they can develop curricula and learning environment, plans its own financing, choose staff, design their own development plans and the basis for improvement. Large autonomy enables school leaders to perform the role of educational leaders with great responsibility. Parallel with decentralization, LifeSmooth discusses recentralization. Actually, we can understand that educational systems throughout Europe came from a more centralized regulated system to a more decentralized regulated system. But at this moment, we are facing a movement to re-centralization of the educational system at different levels. The majority are being re-centralized at the level, the region or the local level, and they are submitted to the local authorities. The schools are becoming submitted to the local authorities. And this is something that Professor Moose advocates that has to be analyzed and understood. This means that the governance system centralized curriculum, at the same time that decentralization is going on, we assist at the same time of a centralization of the curricular decisions and subject matters by prescribing more detailed standards and aims, and at the same time introduce national testing tests and international comparisons based on such testing. Professor Moos also discusses another emerging phenomenon. This is the rise of private sector with freedom to manage staff and operation in schools. Life Moos refers to several categories that he finds necessary to reflect upon when determining what kind of autonomy of leadership is present and what opportunities for equity and learning we can see in each case. And the categories are, first, autonomy, because considering autonomy, we can figure out if decentralization of decisions, what are those that are making within the educational system, and the self-governance models that are being implemented. Governance is a subject to pay attention, but also where is the power? Where is a structural power that is going on, or and how it reveals itself by the use of social technologies, and what is the discourse also going on. We should also consider issues, school frames, budget, staff management, operation, and if they are distributed or not, and the school content. Aims and curriculum are centralized or really not centralized. In most cases, they are centralized. And we have to analyze if there is room for maneuver on the part of actors participating directly in decision-making or not, or about actors deliberating, negotiating, and participating in the construction of the premises and on the process of decision-making. Another aspect is also to pay attention to responsibility for equity and learning at 3 different levels: at the national level, at the local level, and at the school level. And a number of questions also are suggested to be reflected upon. Do schools in your country have limited or large autonomy? What are the strengths and the weaknesses of such level of autonomy? To what extent is the curriculum prescribed in your country? How much room for maneuver do school leaders have? In what areas? How do the above issues define the role of school leaders? Do you think they are well qualified to perform their role related to autonomy? You discussed in the previous questions, and this is why Maria also ended up her presentation talking about the formation, the education of educational actors. Now, I'm going to the third part, you must say, about school autonomy in Portugal, and we can point out 4 different periods of autonomy in Portugal. A first period when autonomy started to emerge in the late 1980s, a second phase of decreased autonomy in the late 1990s, the third phase where autonomies really started to be building up in the first decade of this millennium, and now we are in the phase of deepening autonomy that started in 2011. And now, to stick to my time, I'm going really to read my some lines of my paper. Okay. The first diploma establishing the school autonomy juridical status was issued in 1999. That was a hybrid product between the total centralism of the educational administration and the identification of the school management components to be implemented at school level, according to its characteristics and needs, namely in the cultural, pedagogical, and administrative domains established by law. In the specific field of pedagogical autonomy, a list of areas for intervention are presented, which had been part of the usual initiatives and tacitly assumed as school competence, such as curricula management. And once again, it was what Maria told about, is the management of the curricula that is since the beginning allowed schools to carry on. Educational programs and activities, learning evaluation, school facilities management, timetabling, having as a reference what already existed established by law. It should be mentioned the emphasis given to school finances management opening as an innovation. The possibility for schools to have their private budget according to specific norms to be established by the Ministry of Finances and the Ministry of Education. In fact, it was a means to legitimate clandestine but consented practices in use in the most dynamic schools that had progressively been granted explicit margins of autonomy or, as you wish, room for maneuver, which they were able to expand according to an old diploma from the 60s, requiring the specific approval from the central service. Also, the decree law that I'm referring to on school autonomy was issued and never regulated. The second phase, in 1998, with the publication of the Decree Law 115A, known as the Autonomy Decree, a new political framework for the school's government was set, which included, among others, the necessary requirement for the celebration of autonomy contracts, involving the Ministry of Education, each school or cluster of schools, the educational municipal authorities and/or the regional education authorities, as well as other partners. Schools' applications should include their proposal, the proposes, and the necessary means to launch each school educational project. The proposal has to be supported by a school self-evaluation report and, on that basis, an improvement plan for the following years, which will be subject to a rigorous analysis. Autonomy contracts were to be viewed and presented as a process of explicit open negotiations to be developed into three main steps: the setting of the problem, the delimiting of the issues, and the conditions to be negotiated. The discussion of the autonomy issues and the respective requirements could become a process of fostering knowledge and professional development, namely for school leaders and administration officers, required to be able to identify and justify priorities in school improvement and to be aware of the frontiers of negotiations. This was autonomy came together with the issues of self-evaluation and accountability, which by the time were relatively new areas of work for schools and for the administration officers. To fight against school failure, early dropout, and the difficult working conditions for teachers and students, some specific projects were launched in the 19th with the support of specific programs, like the Program for the Development of Education in Portugal, supported by the operational program Human Potential, and so on. All of them have been working under special contracted conditions, being autonomy the best resource. Careful planning, self-evaluation, frequent reporting, training, and peer learning, together with frequent monitoring, were in use as means to gain self-awareness of the issues involved in the improvement of teaching and learning process, and to report to local and regional authorities. On covering a large number of schools volunteering to integrate these pilot programs, all of them strongly contributed to gain a distributed experience and expertise in the areas of planning, implementation, and institutional evaluation. In general, schools applying for these programs were skilled in the negotiation process within the areas and levels of autonomy granted to each of those specific programs. The second phase, which I called decreed autonomy phase, started later, in fact, with a new law. Sorry. Okay. This is what I've told about. I forgot to change the slide, so let's move on, not to bother you too much. Okay, this is the third phase. And the third phase started actually with another decree law, the Decree Law 75 from 2008, that recovered the autonomy issue in terms of associated to decentralization as major dimensions in a new organization of education, aiming at implementing democracy, equal opportunities, and fostering the improvement of the quality in the education public service. And I quote the law. For that purpose, a larger span of competences will be attributed to the director, referred to as, and I quote, the structure of management and administration, to reinforce the respective capacity of intervention and on creating a regime of evaluation and accountability to make clear that to greater autonomy will respond greater responsibility. In the sequence, the autonomy issues were reviewed, and a new legal framework for the school's administration and management reinforces the director's competencies and the involvement of families and local communities in the strategic school direction to ensure stronger leadership. The requirement to present operational objectives and measurable goals, as if in a model of management by objectives, constitute an additional difficulty for school heads not used to this planning methodology. According to Lopes' empirical study, and I quote, the celebration of school autonomy contracts can be inscribed in the process of the reconstruction of regulation modes of public action within the emerging paradigm of the so-called contractual state and the relevance of knowledge-based governance apparatus. It also evidences how the elaboration of the autonomy contracts can be turned into an instrument for control and responsibility. The school's high expectations brought to the presentation and discussion of their development projects and the comparatively reduced gains, not from the negotiation process, can explain some frustrations and feelings of failure in the contractual approaches to autonomy. As you can see in the slide, in this phase, just one autonomy contract was signed, and in 2007 another 22 new autonomy contracts were signed. But at this moment, the fourth phase of development of autonomy in Portugal, things are happening very differently from previously. At this moment, and we are now describing, based on recent research, we can say that schools' autonomy is really being deepened in spite of its limitations and ambiguities. Autonomy contracts and associated procedures have a value that relies in the fact of allowing shared decision-making against the traditional top-down and unilateral decisions, based on imposition of non-discussed rules. The explicit negotiation process has constituted a political and organizational learning process for both parts. Notwithstanding, there are explicit indicators of the difficulties met in the implementation of these models of governance, which can be interpreted as being related to the actors and not with the process in itself. Even if scholars who had addressed school autonomy in Portugal believe, like Lima, besides others, that power is highly centralized at the level of the Ministry of Education, and schools have no power at all, just undertaking some functional autonomy, which in fact seems to have been enlarged within the margins of autonomy, sometimes subversively, depending on contextual factors like school leaders' profiles, as Barroso, another Portuguese scholar, that already stressed in the late 90s. In 2011-2012 schooling year, the 20 schools with contracts of autonomy at that time were submitted to a new external evaluation procedure on comparing the results of the external evaluation in both cycles. It can be verified that their performance in the domains of education service delivery and leadership and management were predominantly rated as very good, while in the domains results, they were predominantly rated as good. Leadership and management is the domain getting the highest concentration of very good ratings. On comparing the ratings of schools under autonomy contracts with all the other schools evaluated in the same year, the percentage of very good ratings is systematically higher in schools under autonomy contracts. In both evaluation periods, all schools got rating from fair to very good, but a positive evolution is noted. The weight of fair and good ratings decreased, while the percentage of very good ratings increased almost to the double. And I'm quoting data from the Inspectorate of Education in Portugal. It can be concluded that autonomy matters. The National Council of Education in Portugal addressed the topic autonomy and decentralization during the year 2012 because, as we can read in the introduction of the report produced, autonomy is a recurrent objective in the political discourse, not always truly desired and rarely achieved. The Council underlined that the expansion of the access to education and the quality of the results have questioned the system's centralized management with growing vehemence. The diversity of the educational offer, the specificity of each territory, of each population, of each institution, of each individual, makes it necessary to go further in this matter and seek management of greater proximity. proximity, sorry. The National Council recommends the settlement of contracts of autonomy between school or clusters of schools and the Ministry of Education, aiming at broadening the responsibility of educational process and results. There must also be an unequivocal reinforcement of the concentration of pedagogical management activities in school as close as possible to students, allowing the application of singular educational projects. It's also crucial to stimulate the performance of intermediate pedagogical management structures with proper dimension, and to promote their involvement in the main decisions of school clusters of schools' life. It might be the reason why the government currently in charge included within the scope of autonomy contracts by Legislative Order number 20/2012 the projects of priority areas of educational intervention of schools, and signed with them 20 new contracts at the beginning of the schooling year 2012-2013. In fact, as reads in the National Report, State of Education 2012, autonomy and decentralization during 2010-2011, 11% of all students inscribed in the system, enrolled in the system, were benefiting from specific measures within those educational contexts. But it's common knowledge that over 20% of Portuguese children are vulnerable as a result of the economic crisis. Taking measures to meet those children's needs is indeed a priority of social and educational policies in Portugal. Recently, a branch, 2012, another Portuguese researcher, on analyzing the current impact of the Decree Law number 75/2008 on schools' autonomy and decentralization, came to the conclusion that power is being transferred from the Ministry of Education to local authorities. Torres, another scholar, also points out transference of power within schools from the hands of diverse actors to those of the director, along with the abolishment of former democratic process. However, the same scholar, Torres, admits that Portuguese schools seems to be autonomous to interpret educational policies and define their strategic mission within a continuum between two extreme poles. One, advocating selective and meritocratic values, and another electing equality of access and success for all as principles. And she came to the conclusion that to further knowledge on Portuguese autonomy, I'm finishing almost, autonomy is necessary to carry out analysis focused on concrete actions taking place in schools, which we did through a meta-analysis of circa 30 master dissertations case studies produced between 2011 and 2013. That meta-analysis has confirmed evidences presented in the Inspectorate report on school external evaluation. Regarding schools with autonomy contracts, among which are those with the most meaningful evolution. Those schools stand out by monitoring and analyzing systematically their results and implementing improvement strategies. Among these strategies are different practices of pedagogical support and differentiation, such as groups of students of differentiated development, tutoring, pedagogical advisory, groups of level, recovering and accompanying plans, the adoption of active and experimental methodologies, and the organization of practices of pedagogical coordination and curricular articulation, impacting on cooperative work among teachers. However, none of them have curricular, financial, or staff recruitment autonomy. and one of the evaluation indicators is the students' marks on national exams. Thus, the Ministry of Education is signing new autonomy contracts with schools, aiming at getting over 200 signed until December 2013, this year, reaching, therefore, a quarter of all Portuguese school units with autonomy contracts. And just to finish, and I didn't really had a previous conversation with Maria, but my final remark is meeting his final remarks as well. In the construction of autonomy, the nucleus of the process will be in the trust of the actors and rely in their action. In the negotiation of autonomy, the director cannot be independent of the modes of interaction with the negotiators or agents of the administration, and of their interpretation of the directors as a person and as a role specified in the law. This is the context for experiencing that autonomy is not negotiated and received, it has to be learned. Even being good, strong, and effective built through a complex process that certainly takes time, among other resources. Thank you for your patience.
Okay, muchas gracias por la presentación,
De
Ana
nada.
Paula.